Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Marathons HQ, where we do movie marathons connected to new releases and where we enjoy and review some of our favorite movies. This video is part of the Spider-Man Brand New Day Movie Marathon and the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, where we are watching one movie every week as we prepare for the releases of Spider-Man Brand New Day in July 2026 and Avengers Doomsday in December 2026. Today we are discussing Spider-Man Homecoming, released in 2017 and directed by John Watts. This is the third series and the second reboot of the Spider-Man character, at least in the movies. And this is a continuation of Tom Holland's Spider-Man after he was introduced in Captain America Civil War. Overall, I like this movie, but I don't love it. I think I'm in the minority here, and I do think that most people really love Spider-Man Homecoming. There's nothing really specific that I dislike about it. And we'll get into, I have mostly positives and only a few negatives. But when I first saw it and every time I've seen it since then, there was just something about it that I didn't like it more than previous Spider-Man movies, with some exceptions like the bad ones. And this is well told, and it's exciting that Spider-Man's in the MCU and very clearly in the MCU at this point. But yeah, there's just something where I don't love this movie. Rewatching it for these movie marathons, I did see more in it and feel like I understood it at a different level having rewatched it this time. So it kind of raised my estimation of it, but I still just like this movie. For positives, I would mention the visual effects, which are stunning, the setting, which really feels like it is high school students in a high school setting. The action scenes, there are some really notable ones that stand out amongst the MCU and even compared to other Spider-Man action scenes. The world building that they have, where we are introduced to this little corner of the MCU that's Spider-Man's world, and I like the characters and the interactions and how that all works. I also like the villain, which is the Vulture, played by Michael Keaton. And then my favorite part of this movie is a scene where Liz and her dad and Peter are driving to the homecoming dance. I will get into some details about that, but I really, really like that scene. And then for negatives, there's some incontinuity at the start, which took me right out of the movie, and they still haven't really resolved. I think it was just a mistake, but this incontinuity error is frustrating. And then I don't love the heavy MCU presence, especially Iron Man. I don't think it works very well. And this is just a small nitpick, but I don't like Peter's hair in this movie. Okay, the first positive are the visual effects. I think this is a very visual effects heavy movie, but I think it works very well. Lots of Spider-Man's runnings and action and swinging around and stuff has a lot of visual effects in it, of course. But you also have Iron Man, played by Robert Downey Jr., and his suits and everything and the visual effects there. We also get the Vulture, who there's probably some practicality to maybe some of the suit, but I think a lot of it is visual effects. He's played by Michael Keaton. And then at the end, there's like an airplane crash and kind of debris on fire and things like that. Not to mention like Spider-Man climbing up onto the Washington Monument. I do really like the visual effect in the scene where he's at the tippy top of the spire and he's peeking over the edge, and the way that the camera movement takes the audience over the edge. I feel my stomach rise every time I watch that scene. So I think that and the visual effects are pretty great. Next is the setting. This movie, like most Spider-Man movies, are set in high school. But here in this version, it feels like a high school and it feels like high school characters. In the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man universes, both of those actors looked and gave the presence of somebody much older, yet they were in a high school setting and it never really fit. Tom Holland looks younger and acts younger and is younger, so him playing a high school student I think has more believability. Excuse me. But then also the fact that it's called Homecoming because there's a homecoming dance, and there's also like a little wink to the audience of Spider-Man has come home to the MCU. This is his homecoming. I think all of that works really well. And Peter really does feel like a high school student There's even a scene where he says, I am so beyond high school right now, or he might have said, I'm so above high school right now, because he's got this overinflated ego because he's helped out with the Avengers. So I think the setting really works and really feels like it's part of the story in this movie. Next are the action scenes. There's lots of action here where Spider-Man is beating up on various villains, whether that's the Vulture or the Shocker or just kind of regular bad guys that he's trying to stop. But also in the Washington Monument scene where he's trying to save his teachers and classmates from the debate team as the elevator fails. That's a really thrilling action scene. And then when he's on the ferry and he's trying to stop the bad guys there and it all goes wrong, and so Peter is zipping through the middle of this ferry that's been cut in half and he's webbing it together. That's a really powerful image. Of course, there's kind of a Messiah type image in there. But I think that and the rest of the action scenes are unique and clever, and they show this Peter's powers and personality in a different way, which I really liked. I also like the Spider-Man world building. In Captain America's Civil War, we do get our first glimpse of Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland, and Aunt May, played by Marissa Tomei. And we see their little New York apartment, and we see that he's from Queens and stuff. But in Spider-Man Homecoming, the world is much more fleshed out. And I just think it's pretty successful. We get introduced to Spider-Man's friends and cast of characters. We get to meet his best friend, Ned, played by Jacob Batalon. And Ned Leeds is in the comics, but he's not, Peter's bestie. I like that they just took a character from the comics and made him his own, and he kind of had some interesting things to do. I liked the crush on Liz Allen, played by Laura Harrier. I think it was very wise to not jump right into another Mary Jane, and also to not jump into a Gwen Stacy, who are some of Peter's most famous love interests. I like that they took Liz Allen, who is from the comics and kind of a staple there in Peter's romantic life. But I just think that was a good pivot to feel more fresh and different, and also it just felt like a high school crush, which is kind of fun. Flash Thompson, played by Tony Revolori, and the rest of the debate team, I think, are serviceable and they feel like real classmates, especially how Flash picks on Peter, but then has high respect for Spider-Man. That's a pretty funny dynamic. And then we also get introduced to Michelle, played by Zendaya. She doesn't really do much. I was almost surprised at how little she does in Spider-Man Homecoming. Her role is hugely expanded in the next two movies, but here she's just in a background character. I didn't pick up on like romance vibes between her and Peter, sort of toward the end. And I don't love at the end when she says, "My friends call me MJ," because to me she doesn't even fit the Mary Jane character. So that's kind of a weird thing that they did. I like that she's just a new character named Michelle, and she's kind of in the background that gets built on later. But I thought the world building here of Spider-Man's little world in a high school was pretty effective. Next, I do like the villains in this movie. Spider-Man has a very rich cast of villains in the comics to draw from. And so in this movie, they chose to bring Adrian Toomes, also known as the Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, into this movie. We also get some side characters like the Shocker, who's one of my favorites from the comics. He's portrayed by both Logan Marshall Green and Bokeem Woodbine in kind of two successive versions of Shocker. It's a pretty loose adaptation there, but I do like that they include him there. And then we also get the Tinkerer. I don't recall who plays him, but that's like a very minor villain from the comics that they kind of just threw in there as one of Vulture's team. But I do like it. I think it was wise to take the approach that they did with the Vulture. In the comics, he wears like a real fabric suit and he sucks or absorbs the youth out of younger people so he can stay young, but then he ages rapidly. I think that's way too far-fetched for a Spider-Man movie. So I like that it's a flying Vulture suit, and I think the design of it's really cool. The glowing green eyes and the oxygen mask, and then the bomber jacket that has the frill. I think it's a really great costume and homage to the comic Vulture, but it's still this unique thing. I really like what they do with Adrian Toomes' character as it pays off later in one of the next positives. But I do think the villains are strong. Hard to compare with the other villains in the Spider-Man movies because this just feels like such a different movie. But I thought the villains were certainly a positive here. Now, my last positive is kind of a long one. And when I first saw this movie, I liked this scene, but then I saw a breakdown on YouTube by another creator called Lessons from the Screenplay. And this was part of a playlist of movies started by Nando V Movies called One Marvelous Scene. And it was on the occasion where Nando V Movies, a big comic book YouTuber, was saying, let's all make a movie about our favorite MCU scene. And so Lessons from the Screenplay chose this scene. And as I watched that breakdown, it just helped me understand this amazing scene in a clearer light. So this is all taken from Lessons from the Screenplay, which I'll link in the show notes on the YouTube version here. But basically, in this scene, at the start of the scene, we have three characters, and they all have different amounts of knowledge. Peter Parker is in the back seat, and he knows what we know as the audience. We know that Peter is Spider-Man, and we know that Adrian is the Vulture, okay? Then we have Adrian. He knows something different. He knows that he is the Vulture, but he does not know that Peter is Spider-Man. He's just the date that his daughter is taking to a dance. So he has a different knowledge than Peter does. And then we have Liz in the backseat too, and she's kind of our neutral. She does not know that Peter is Spider-Man, and she does not know that her dad is the Vulture. So at the start of the scene, we're set up that way. And as they go through this scene, and Adrian is kind of asking Peter some questions, and he's starting to uncover this mystery, Liz innocently and unknowingly is giving information to her dad so that by the end of the scene, Peter knows that he's Spider-Man and knows that Adrian is the Vulture. But then throughout the scene, I should say, Adrian learns that Peter is Spider-Man and he knows that he is the Vulture. Liz still doesn't know anything, but it's the revelation of those two characters through subtext alone coming to the same understanding of the situation they're in is really, really well done. And even the shots as they go through, where the camera is on Michael Keaton's face and there's a red light because they're parked in front of a red light, then it switches to green, but he doesn't react. And then it cuts to Liz, who's his dad. The light turned green, go, drive the car, because this revelation is coming to him like a light bulb changing or switching on. So credit to Lessons from the Screenplay for highlighting that, but I think that's such a great scene where then Adrian kicks out Liz so he can have the dad talk with Peter, when really it's a threat because they both now have the same understanding that he is Spider-Man. So Adrian has to threaten him, but also he recognizes that Peter as Spider-Man saved Liz's life, so he gives him that escape. It's a really, really well done scene. And I love how it unfolds and how only in a movie like this, setting it up in this way, could something like this happen. So that's by far my favorite scene in this movie. It's not my favorite MCU scene, but it is my favorite from Spider-Man Homecoming. And then for negatives, there is a continuity error that in the theaters was so incorrect that it took me out of the movie because it was so strange. And then every time I watch this movie, I'm reminded, how did they mess up so badly? And how did it get through so many, producers' eyes that nobody caught it and nobody at Marvel Studios caught it. But the movie opens up at the aftermath of the Avengers Battle of New York, which in our world happened in 2012 because that's when the movie came out, but also in universe, it was the year 2012. So Adrian Toomes and his team is cleaning up a bunch of Chitauri mess when the Department of Damage Control arrives and kicks him out, and they kind of start him on his villainous path. And then a caption comes up that says 8 years later. So if that first scene took place in 2012, 8 years later takes you to 2020. But this movie came out in 2016, which is only 4 years later. So that doesn't really make sense. And then you think, well, then does this movie take place in 2020? But in the official Marvel timeline, we know that Avengers Infinity War happened in 2019. So it can't be that the events of Spider-Man Homecoming happened 8 years later. It has to be that 8 years later caption is incorrect. It should have said 4 years later, or maybe 5. You could probably get away with that if this movie came out in 2017. I think it's 2016. This movie came out in 2017. You could say 4 years later to 2016, or 5 years later, 2017, or somewhere in the middle. But 8 years later is just factually incorrect. It was when this movie came out, and it is still incorrect now. And they can't change that because the movie's been released. And I know that's just a nitpick, but it just is such a small error, but a big error. I guess it's a small fix for this huge error. So that's a negative just because it doesn't make sense. And next, I don't love the very heavy MCU presence. I was delighted back in after 2012. It was 2013 or 2014 or something when it was announced that Sony Pictures, who owns the right to the Spider-Man character, not just the film rights, but the character rights, they'd announced a partnership between Sony Pictures and Marvel Studios that Spider-Man would be lent to the Avengers movies, but then the Sony individual Spider-Man solo movies would include some MCU elements. I thought that was a great idea. The best of both worlds. Everybody gets a great deal. So in Spider-Man Homecoming, we get some MCU elements, which I understand. I just think it's too much. We get a very significant supporting role by Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr. But since he created the suit for Peter and he's there mentoring him a whole bunch of times, it just feels like Spider-Man is like Iron Man Jr., which in the comics, that I don't recall that dynamic ever being so strong. Sure, they know each other and there's a mentor-mentee thing and they're both science geniuses, but it's just very strong in Spider-Man Homecoming, even being a plot point where Tony says to Peter, if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. So he takes away the Spider-Man suit. So then Peter has to kind of pull his strength from within. Sure, that's a great character motivation, but it just is so manufactured, pun intended, because Tony Stark is in there. We also get Happy Hogan, played by Jon Favreau, who's entertaining and a fun side character, but it's just a reminder of we're in the MCU here. We even get a couple little high school detention videos featuring Captain America, played by Chris Evans, which is fun and funny. It just feels like in this movie, the Sony producers were saying, don't forget we're in the MCU. It's been a few minutes and we haven't reminded the audience. Let's tell them in some way that we're in the MCU. Don't worry, we're all playing nice. It just felt like overkill, which I just didn't love that aspect of it. Spider-Man should run on his own steam. We've had 5 movies previously where he was just in his own universe, and I like the idea that Spider-Man's in the MCU in a larger universe. This movie just felt very heavy-handed trying to deliver that story beat to us. And then one other small micro negative is I just don't like Peter Parker's haircut in this movie. I think his hair in Captain America Civil War looked great. It was really short and very Spider-Man-like from the comics. But in Spider-Man Homecoming, it's much longer, and it gets kind of longer and longer in the other movies, which is just weird. Very small nitpick. Who cares? It's just hair, but that's just one thing that always stands out is I just don't like the look of Peter Parker in this movie, because it's not that saying that Peter Parker can't have long hair. I just don't think it looks good on Tom Holland in this movie. Now we'll take a moment to talk about the Spider-Man suit. This is the same Spider-Man suit that we saw in Captain America Civil War, and if you watched that review, you heard me talk about how I'm not crazy about it. I don't think it's the worst suit, but I still just don't really like it. I don't like the fabric. To me, it feels like it isn't spandex. It's more like a sock, like a cotton-based fabric, and it has kind of a shimmer sparkle if the light hits it that just doesn't appeal to me. And then I don't like that the lines are doubled up on the webbing on the red parts. And then I mentioned before, I don't like the lines that break up the eye lines. So I feel like the Spider-Man suit from the comics is classic with crisp lines, and kind of your eye can go across the suit and it's very clear. But here in this version, there's lots of like black plastic or rubber bits on the shoulders and on the ankles and on the shins and even on the waist, and it just kind of, he almost has like a utility belt too. It just looks strange to me. I do really like the narrowing eyes, which I think are a great component because it's an homage to Peter being a photographer in the comics. I just don't think it works that well. And we do kind of see some underarm webbing that helps him to glide a little bit, which is cool, and that is from the comics, but it still just seems strange. And then the biggest thing I don't like is that in this movie, compared to Civil War, we get a lot more time kind of in the mask with Peter, and he gets introduced to another AI that he calls Karen, which interestingly enough is voiced by Jennifer Connelly, who's married to Paul Bettany, who was the AI Jarvis. So here in the MCU, we have another AI who's voiced by a husband-wife couple who have both voiced AIs in the MCU, which is kind of fun. But Karen being in the Spider-Man suit, talking to him and walking him through all of the different tech options available in his suit, to me that does not feel like Spider-Man. Spider-Man from the comics is a self-made kind of guy. It's a suit that he made out of extra scrap material that was just laying around. It does not have AI and technology features to it. So I just don't like that that is really expanded upon here in this movie. So it's an okay looking suit, I suppose. It's not the worst. That is still held by the Amazing Spider-Man 1 costume. But I still have some big problems with the Spider-Man suit in Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, how might Spider-Man Homecoming connect to Spider-Man Brand New Day? We know that Tom Holland will return as Peter Parker Spider-Man. Zendaya will return as Michelle, although she'll be a very different version of the character than we've seen here. Jacob Batalon will return as Ned, and also as a different sort of version of that character. We're also going to see the return of Michael Mando as Mac Gargan. He's kind of a side guy here, and if you knew the comics, you recognize the name Mac Gargan because that's the name of the villain, the Scorpion. And so in Spider-Man Brand New Day, we will see Mac Gargan, played by Michael Mando, in a Scorpion costume as a villain. I don't think he's a main villain. I think he's just a side villain, kind of in like a montage, early movie type thing. But we will see him. It's also reported that we'll see Angourie Rice as Betty Brant and Hemke Madera as Mr. Delmar. So a few returning faces from Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, how might Spider-Man Homecoming connect to Avengers Doomsday? There really shouldn't be much connection. Interestingly, Tom Holland's Spider-Man is not confirmed to be part of Avengers Doomsday. I do expect we're going to see him in probably Doomsday, but certainly in Avengers Secret Wars in December 2027. But none of the other supporting characters from Spider-Man Homecoming are expected to be in Infinity War either, with the exception of Robert Downey Jr. will be in Avengers Doomsday, but not as Tony Stark. He will be portraying Victor Von Doom, Doctor Doom, as the main villain. So a different version, or possibly even a completely different character. But other than him, there's nothing confirmed to be continuity from Spider-Man Homecoming to Avengers Doomsday. So that's my review of Spider-Man Homecoming. What do you think of this movie, and how do you think it might connect to Spider-Man Brand New Day or Avengers Doomsday? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Follow Movie Marathons HQ on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and also on Letterboxd, where you can see all of the movie marathons we've got going on right now. The next movie in this marathon is Spider-Man Far From Home. See you at the movies.